Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We face today in Canada and in British Columbia an economic crisis that is unprecedented in our lifetime. The President of the United States is imposing unfair and unjustified tariffs on BC and Canadian imports. He's tearing up a trade agreement that he himself negotiated during his first term. He's declaring economic war on a friendly neighbour. It is a betrayal of the worst kind. The U.S. President is causing turmoil here in Canada, at home, and around the world. One day he says that the tariffs are imposed for a particular reason. The next day, a different reason. The Government of Canada responds to his concerns, and then a new pretext is delivered by the President. They make demands, they change the demands, there are new demands. The one consistent demand is there will be no tariffs as long as Canada becomes the 51st state. It will never be the 51st state. The White House continues to move the goalposts. This is no way to conduct business, let alone to negotiate with a friend and a neighbor. The behavior by the White House is chaotic in looks and in how it feels here. That's the point. It is a crude negotiating tactic being used as a club to try to create fear and mistrust among Canadians, designed to break our resolve. But, Honourable Speaker, we will never break. Honourable Speaker, I rise to reassure British Columbians in this chamber that we remain steadfast. We will do anything necessary to protect British Columbian families and the jobs they depend on. It's important to be clear, Honourable Speaker, about the moment that we face. For generations, our two nations have been friends and trading partners. We share links of love and family and commerce. When there's an emergency facing America, we step up, we go and fight the wildfires. 9/11, we supported Americans who were stranded. And Americans have always done the same for us. We strengthened the bond between our two countries over generations. In fact, in our province, at the biggest border crossing, there's a monument called the Peace Arch, Honourable Speaker. It separates the cities of Blaine, Washington, and Surrey, British Columbia. And within that monument, there is a gate, 2 iron ceremonial gates. And the inscription reads, quote, "May these gates never be closed," unquote. The monument celebrates 100 years of peace between our nations, and we've had another 111 years since then. Have any two nations in history ever had such a fruitful and prosperous relationship as Canada and the United States? Yet now we have a friend behaving as a foe, and sadly in this we are not alone. Nearly every country in the world is being threatened by this American president. There can be no doubt about the intent of the tariffs. They are intended to weaken us as a nation. This is a precarious moment, and we have to make decisions with great care. The stakes are too high. We'll be guided by our values. We will work hard, we'll respect our neighbours, we'll be faithful and truthful friends, and our word will be our bond. We will extend the hand of friendship to everyone in the world who seeks freedom and peace. This is how to protect British Columbia businesses and families, by sticking to the values that have served us so well so far. Honourable Speaker, we have taken the time we've had since the President's first tweet to prepare for this moment. When we are ready, we are responding. We are responding to this unprecedented attack with record investments in infrastructure and by accelerating projects across the province. Because, Honourable Speaker, the most important support that government can give to families right now is a good paying job. We're doing this work hand in hand with business, labour, and Indigenous leadership. We're removing international working on that too. We're removing internal trade barriers within our own province and in partnership with provinces and territories across Canada, a long overdue move. We're ramping up the Buy BC campaign so that British Columbians can choose to support BC businesses and farmers. We're working with a Team Canada approach to deliver the message to Americans that this hurts American families as much as it hurts Canadians, with higher prices and less employment, less prosperity on both sides of the border. We've removed alcohol produced in Republican states from the shelves of our BC liquor stores, pulling Florida rum, Texas vodka, Tennessee whiskey, and Kentucky bourbon from our shelves to show the President's allies about the integrated nature of our relationship. We do this not because we're malicious, but because we refuse to surrender, Honourable Speaker. When it comes to what we buy as a government, we're ensuring we buy Canadian first, as are our schools, our health authorities, and Crown corporations. And we're going to continue to diversify our trading partners around the world, so we never again are beholden to the actions of one person in the White House. Let's remind members that this trade agreement that the President has ripped up is the trade agreement that he negotiated. He said there'll be no tariffs if Canada becomes the 51st state. This is not an invitation to negotiate, that is a threat. We will not be shaken by these threats. Canada will remain a sovereign nation. We'll address this issue with Canadian solutions, the Canadian way. Canadians are as united today as we have ever been. We fought wars in the 40s, we celebrated our centennial in the 60s, the new flag. We celebrate hockey victories. Canadians are not quick to anger. We don't seek strife. You can see it in our founding documents. It gives the Parliament power to, quote, make laws for peace, order, and good government. Not very dramatic stuff, but core to the Canadian personality and identity. We will not be dictated to. We will not be intimidated by bullies. And Mr. Speaker, everybody in this place knows how fortunate we are to live in British Columbia. Blessed by geography, blessed with resources, blessed by our most important resource, the people who call this place home and make it what it is. We will come through this together because we are stronger together. We'll protect the services that people rely on. We'll have a stronger, even more diversified economy in the future, and we will prevail. We will endure what comes next because all of us know what we've built together is worth preserving. Last weekend, Canadian comedian Mike Myers was on Saturday Night Live. He wore a t-shirt that said, "Canada's not for sale," and he mouthed the words to the cameras, "Elbows up." Now, for those of you who may not be hockey fans, elbows up means the other team's trying to take advantage, and if they come at you, they're going to feel it, Honourable Speaker. You know, as Canadians, we have a reputation for politeness. We're polite, sometimes to a fault, but it is a grave mistake to see that politeness as weakness. We will always be the true north, strong and free with our elbows up, Honourable Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I wish I wasn't giving a statement today. Clearly, the tariffs, the impact that will have on the people in British Columbia is wrong. It is something that we need to push back on. We need to stand and protect people in British Columbia. We need to protect people in Canada. We are Canadians. We are British Columbians. And I can say this, and I will echo the words of the Premier. 51st state is not on. I will not, and I know our caucus will never accept the idea of being the 51st state of the United States. There are hard days ahead of us. There's no question. And unfortunately, we're in a very vulnerable position. We've had somebody who has smacked us across the head, and unfortunately our hands have been tied behind our back because we have been left vulnerable. And it is unfortunate that we are in this situation because Canada and British Columbia have all the strength that we could ever want. Canada is the 10th largest economy in the world. 10th largest. It is a powerhouse. It has the potential to be a powerhouse, but it has been held back. And British Columbia is incredibly vulnerable. We need to do everything we can to stop this vulnerability, to make sure that we look after our people in British Columbia, and as part of Canada, to make sure that we are there for all Canadians. But we have been held back. Mr. Speaker, in the last couple of years, between 20 and 30% of the electricity we consume comes from the United States. That's a vulnerability that we should not have. That's a vulnerability and a failure of government and government policies. Close to half the food we consume comes from the United States. We're vulnerable. We need to be doubling our food production. We need to be doing everything we can to support our local farmers, so driving down those cost structures so that we can look after our own people and not be vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. Business confidence in this province has plummeted. We need to have an environment that is welcoming for investment so that we can see the innovation, so that we can see the good job creations. And Mr. Speaker, our refining capacity in this province is laughable. Less than 40% of the energy we consume from refined products comes from our own province. Most of that comes from south of the border, especially when it comes to aviation fuel. We are tied with the Americans, and we trusted the Americans as our trading partners, and for good reason, but at the same time, we continually undermined our own province, our own people, with these vulnerabilities, to the place now where we have a change south of the border, and now we know who's been swimming without a bathing suit. Mr. Speaker, we are sending patients to the Americans for care because our own system can't handle it. What would happen if they stopped? Mr. Speaker, we accept money from environmental organizations south of the border that get involved in stopping our projects in British Columbia. How is this acceptable? Why have steps not been taken to stop that? So that we make our own decisions here in British Columbia for British Columbians. Mr. Speaker, these tariffs are wrong, just as our forestry and the duties that have been on our forestry for the last 8 years is wrong. We entered into a free trade agreement with the Americans in good faith. We entered into that agreement knowing that free trade can strengthen both countries and give us the ability to be able to grow, to be able to prosper, and to make sure that people have that hope and dream for a future. The free trade agreement obviously is being disrupted. Hopefully we get to a place where we can remove those tariffs and get back to the idea of trade. But in the meantime, we need to be taking every step we can to strengthen British Columbia. The Premier has said it. He said we need to do anything necessary to make sure that we look after our own people. Well, here's some ideas, Mr. Premier, or Mr. Speaker. The Canada-wide free trade agreement. Talked about that, something that was first proposed back in 1992, and successive governments have failed to do anything. Time we implement that. We need to understand that we have a fiscal emergency. We introduced a budget yesterday with a $10 or $11 billion deficit, leaving ourselves vulnerable, not having the flexibility to be able to do things. We need to get our spending under control. We need to be able to make sure that we can invest into our economy and get things happening. We need to deal with our port security. We need to deal with fentanyl. We need to deal with these issues that we have for the protection of our own people. Not to mention, even though we may not have a good neighbour at the moment south of the border, it's the right thing to do for everyone in Canada and in North America. We should be looking at everything that is blocking projects from going forward in this province and removing those barriers. We should not be putting in place these 2030 strategies and everything else that is restricting our economy. We need to remove these things. We need to get our mines open. We need to get LNG happening. We need to drive down the cost for our forest sector. We need to reopen trade offices. We need to do so much, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that British Columbians are going to be looked after by British Columbians, taking advantage of our resources to provide the quality of life that's needed. As the Premier says, anything that is necessary, these steps are necessary. We need to stop with this partisan stuff. We need to stop with the woke nonsense. We need to get on with looking after people in this province and opening up our economy in British Columbia. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to take steps, such as making sure that jobs in British Columbia and the unions that work in British Columbia are British Columbian. There are, in community benefit agreements, there are 19 unions in those agreements who are headquartered in the United States. 19 of those unions, and Canadian companies and Canadian unions are being blocked from working on projects. Enough. Let's start putting Canada first. Let's put British Columbians first. Let's make sure that everything we do is about supporting our economy here in British Columbia. I'll join the Premier in doing anything that we can to support this. And I understand when the Premier says, if it were easy, it would already done. It is not easy. There are tough decisions that need to be made. There are important decisions that need to be made. Who knows how long this will go on for? It's not a matter of stopping to drink alcohol. It's a matter of fundamentally restructuring what we do in British Columbia and in Canada, how we support ourselves as a nation, how we build ourselves as a nation, how we make sure that we take our rightful place in the economy of the world, taking advantage of our resources. That, Mr. Speaker, is what we need to do. What we need to do is make sure we fulfill our God-given right for something better for the people in British Columbia, and that's what the Conservatives will stand for. We will stand against Trump, we will stand against the tariffs, but we will make sure that we do everything we can to fight for British Columbians so that they can have the hope and prosperity that is deserved to them in this great province. Thank you.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you to the Premier and my fellow Speaker from the Opposition for their comments. Yesterday was a tough day for British Columbia. What had been our closest ally and trade partner proved itself to be untrustworthy, disruptive, economically illiterate. For British Columbians, and indeed people across this entire continent, the coming days, months, and years will be filled with uncertainty, with policy decisions impacting lives and livelihoods communicated via social media at all hours of the day. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the mental health impacts of this uncertainty, waking up each day, and immediately turning on the news, waiting to see what announcements have been made and how they will shape our lives and livelihood is a stress that no one needs. I hope that everyone has the support networks in place to deal with this and can access any formal supports that they need. As provincial politicians, we have limited ability to shape international trade. But what we do have the ability to do is to help shape our own province, protecting BC workers and livelihoods as we transition away from reliance on trade with the United States must be a priority. We must ensure that our response protects people, but does not undo the important work to build a clean, green economy to prevent and mitigate the worst of the climate crisis, or to undo the progress that we have made on reconciliation. We must ensure that we look after each other, The coming months will impact people, their livelihoods, their finances, and their cross-border relationships. As political leaders, it is our responsibility to ensure that the supports that people need are there when they need them. We must use this crisis to forge a future that is resilient, fair, and environmentally sound. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.